There is a mountain of literature out there in the management world addressing change. I found over 50,000 books on Amazon on change. However, the interesting thing is, despite that, most change initiatives fail. According to Gallup Business Research, over 70% of change initiatives fail. When you look at further analysis, it shows that the critical breakdowns can be attributed to adverse human responses to the change effort. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And let's see. Oh, there we go. So in his groundbreaking research, author William Bridges aptly observed that it isn't the changes that do you in, it's actually the transitions. So I'm going to be using some different language today. It's not too hard to catch up to, but I want to point it out that change and transition are two different things and that we'll be talking about. When we're talking about change is referring to the external shift that that a change effort might be moving through. So for example, a new location, a new reporting structure, new software, those are all changes. A transition, however, is internal. It's the psychological process that people go through to come to terms with a new situation. So when I use the term change management or change initiative, I'll be referring to the change effort in general or the external aspects of the organizational change. And a change manager will denote a person responsible for planning and executing a technical shift. And when I use the term transition or transition leadership or transition leader, I will be referring to the alignment of the change to those who have to participate in it. And you'll notice that I purposely used a difference there, manager versus leader. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other. Both roles are necessary. But since we will be talking primarily about the human aspects of change, I'm going to be focusing on the leader's role. And I might also mention that even though those roles are distinct, a single individual usually performs both roles. And a successful change manager also has to be a transition leader, anticipating and planning for the human response to change. So let's begin by putting a change experience into the context of a transition. You may think that I have transposed or reversed this graphic, but yes, indeed, you see that the start of this begins with the ending and the beginning is last. In order to begin looking at the human dynamics of change, we have to look at it from this fairly simple model. Simple model, difficult concepts to execute. So a transition starts with an ending and finishes with a beginning. And between these terminals is the neutral zone. And you'll notice also that each of those phases stretches across the other. And the reason for that is phases don't necessarily have a clear boundary. They overlap, and humans are, we're messy. But typically when you're going through a transition, there is one that is dominant at a given point in time, and it gives way to the next. So oftentimes, change managers dwell on strategies to bypass the discomfort, but this short circuits the brain's natural ability to process and adapt to change. And we're going to be talking a lot about that today. And I will be providing you with a bunch of to-dos or ideas to try out. And I will be, or we will be sending out later on also the PowerPoint slides, so you don't have to feverishly try to write everything down. You'll be provided with that. And I've also included notes in those slides so that you'll almost receive what I'm talking about. So, all right, well, there's a paradox when change managers present a change as a new start. Paradoxically, new starts register as endings psychologically. It requires letting go of something, and at best, we're happy to let go of the old situation, and at worst, we're stricken with insurmountable grief over a loss. As I mentioned before, changes are external. They happen quickly. Software is installed, individuals get promoted, you move to a new office, and funding begins or ends. But the internal transition happens much more slowly, and instead of becoming a new person instantly, individuals are likely to spend some time struggling with discomfort, fear, inadequacy, confusion. This is the nature of the neutral zone. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Only after an ending and suitable struggle in that neutral zone can a real beginning occur. For change managers, the appeal of realizing a fantastic new vision can lead to a blind excitement that ignores the endings and tries to bypass that neutral zone. But recognizing the bitter realities that accompany some change can tempt the change manager to expeditiously move past the carnage with a blind eye. The transition leader, however, must recognize that successful beginnings require the type of energy, synergy, and innovation that can only be simmered and birthed after an ending and suitable time in that neutral zone that we talked about. So I like to say you wouldn't serve a stew immediately after turning on the stove, so don't expect a revitalized organization the moment a change is initiated. Let's talk about endings. The sense of loss is the leading cause of resistance in change efforts. The emotions associated with losing something can be welcome or traumatic depending on your perception. So for instance, most people who lose weight experience energy and a renewed sense of vitality. However, if you lose weight due to a disease, you're probably not going to experience the same euphoria. Similarly, an entry-level technician may be excited about the prospects for advancement brought on by a reorganization, while a seasoned veteran who spent a career climbing the organizational ladder may feel demoralized by that change. So some literature suggests that early adopters are a change leader's greatest asset. And as far as transitions go, this ignores the probability that early adopters may have an unrealistic expectation for what the change will do for them. If the expectation isn't realized later on, early adopters start to experience an ending later when others are emerging into a new beginning. I guess the bottom line really of this is we have to acknowledge that everyone in the organization experiences an ending, whether initially perceived as favorable or not. Endings are not bad. Another factor is the degree of impact. So some changes are perceived as minor to some individuals, while they're of great consequence to others. For instance, a new copy machine, it can be a really big deal for a person who spends a day printing, while a periodic user may hardly notice or care. So individuals who consider a change minor when it does not, they will consider a change minor when it doesn't significantly threaten the core framework of expectations that they've been operating under. So if, on the other hand, if a change invalidates those core expectations, it's perceived as a crisis. So both the impact and perceived loss and individual experiences have little to do with an employee's value, but it's easy for a change manager to feel disapproving of individuals who exhibit the negative reactions to the change initiatives. So a transition leader has to learn to recognize and understand the conditions elicited by the change. An ending phase of transition typically causes stress, even to individuals who might not initially acknowledge or be aware of the impact. In her pioneering work on death and dying, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross presented the idea of the stages of grief. The stages of grief are apparent in people who experience loss in organizations too. So a change or a transition leader will recognize people experiencing any number of stages of these stages as soon as the change is announced, and people can be at anywhere on this. And I'd like to go through some of what those symptoms look like. So we start with the assumption that a person is in a stable position of comfort, and once the change is introduced, immobilization occurs, and the employee might be surprised, confused, otherwise discomforted, and this is followed by some degree of denial. Denial can look like the expression that, oh, the change isn't going to impact me, or I really welcome the change, even though I don't know what it fully entails, or that the change will merely fade as the flavor of the day and things will return to normal. These are all denial denial symptoms. As the change begins to have noticeable impact, the employee may feel anger, and this may not be open hostility. In today's professional environment, most employees have learned a sense of decorum. So anger may be manifested by just venting with peers, or defiance to guidelines or directives, maybe some passive-aggressive behavior, even a rash of resignations. Anger gives way to bargaining. Employees may attempt to negotiate for small concessions or limit their involvement to activities, only the activities that they feel most comfortable with. And then employees may experience feelings of despair, victimization, or failure. They might exhibit decreased motivation, decreased drive. At some point, employees begin to experiment with the change itself. They get glimmers of hope, positive outlooks for the future might begin to emerge, and they begin to produce ideas, enhancements, and innovations within the new framework that's been presented with the change. Finally, the employee will reach the stage of acceptance, and they will make adaptations and experience success within this new framework. So a transition leader can play a role in helping employees through the ending. And while recognizing these stages and having trust that most employees will successfully navigate the transition, the transition leader should in no way tolerate unacceptable behavior. An employee spending some time venting or losing productivity in an environment of chaos and confusion is not the same. It's not the same as hostile, abusive, dangerous, or illegal behavior. These behaviors have to be addressed immediately. So where does a transition leader's role begin? A proactive transition leader will identify who's losing what. You can't identify every possible impact, but you can identify likely impacts by asking a few questions during the change planning process. So first, what is actually going to change? If you use phrases such as, oh, there's going to be improved productivity or greater access for the public, that doesn't spell out what is changing. You have to be more specific, such as the reception area is moving to this space, the data team is moving to the State Street office, and we are eliminating these 3 positions. What are the secondary impacts that you can anticipate? All staff in the W office will need to dedicate 4 hours a week for the next month, consolidating files, preparing them for archives or whatever. Bob and Lisa will need to switch offices. Carol will have an additional employee to supervise. So map these secondary changes out as far as you can, anticipating a long chain of cause and effect relationships. So this is a vital part of the change planning process. Now identify who is going to have to let go of something, and what do they have to let go of. Be sure you identify more than just tangible assets. So for instance, Mark is going to lose the program he spent 5 years building, and will be placed in a position that limits her promotional opportunities. John will be physically isolated from colleagues he most trusts. These are all going to have psychological impacts for the employee. So anticipating the answer to these questions addresses transition, and that's what we're talking, transition. Asking the questions during the change planning process helps all the change managers begin to think about the human dimensions of the change that's presented. So Leaders are in the communicating business, right? The transition leader should keep in mind 4 concepts that when communicating change. First one, number 1, it's not a secret. If you think that concealing the news until the last minute will avoid heartache, you need to ask yourself if you're willing to trade heartache for bitterness and distrust. So any information that's not confidential should be shared. The grapevine is likely already spreading the news. So even if you have an effective secrecy pact, keeping that information secret will lead employees to distrust future communication as incomplete or untrustworthy. Repetition, number 2, repetition. Just because it was announced once doesn't make it stick. Share the change details numerous times and in various different ways. Countless emails might be good, but you should assure that you're using some other vehicles as well. Number 3, it doesn't trickle down. You can't rely on the chain of command to relay the change initiatives accurately. Supervisors, other supervisors who are involved with the change are going through the transition themselves, and they're likely to experience confusion and anxiety. Some supervisors might delay communication, and it's important to inform the management team and supervisors, but communicate the change initiative as broadly as possible. Number 4, silence is deadly. The idea that you don't say anything until you know the details can be dangerous. People fill in the information when none is provided. So don't be afraid to say what you don't know. Let them know what the approximate timeline is and report back, even if the decision is delayed. So what is a transition leader to do or not do to help individuals once a change is announced? Well, first, don't argue with what you hear. Loss is a subjective experience, so discounting a person's expression of loss will at best silence them and at worst heighten their sense of loss and isolation. Acknowledge the losses. Expressing sympathy goes a long way. Deal openly with the loss. You don't have to have a solution or replacement for the loss. You just have to be willing and present to acknowledge it. Don't own misdirected blame. When anger is expressed, it's often searching for a scapegoat. So you don't have to accept the blame for the way the person feels. You cannot take those feelings away from them. Don't be baited by bargaining attempts. Distinguish the real problem solving from desperate attempts to avoid or undo the change. Don't belittle the anxious. Catastrophic fantasies commonly erupt with changes. Don't make people feel stupid for feeling anxiety, but simply give them correct information as you have it, but don't invent stories yourself to try to quell the anxiety. Don't promote unrealistic hope. Don't try to reassure people by painting false or unlikely positive scenarios. And support the disoriented. Confusion, forgetfulness, disorganization commonly occur during change, even among the most competent individuals. Provide reassurance that this is normal and assist where possible with some patience and understanding. That'll go a long way. Restore a sense of control. As people experience a lack of motivation and decreased energy, they might be experiencing the depressive phase. Help them identify elements of work they have control over and encourage their engagement. So when a change is introduced, it's exciting to think about the future, and there's nothing taboo about talking about the future, but transition leaders are also sensitive to the ending that the new change initiates and that people are experiencing and struggling with. In many cases, managers have significantly more time to they've had more time to grapple with the details of the change, and they're aware of the precipitating factors and the rationale behind it. Oftentimes, they've had design input. They might be well ahead of many employees in the transition process themselves. So it's easy to forget that employees need time to catch up to speed. There are several activities that a transition leader can employ to aid a successful ending process. So let's talk about a couple of those. First, spell out exactly what is and what is not over. When one thing ends, employees begin to wonder what else is getting thrown out or with the lapsing conditions. Celebrate endings. If you expect employees in your organization to contribute to the new vision, they have to know that you appreciated what they contributed to the old vision. It seems simple, but symbolic or celebratory activities to conclude a chapter of the organization's history might be very appropriate. There was one organization that, for example, having reached the end of the program's funding, decided to hold a breakfast to recognize staff and stakeholders who contributed over the years. Respect the past. Regardless of how great you expect the change to be, respect the past. Enthusiasm for the future can sometimes lead change managers to denigrate the past or even ridicule people who contributed to the past processes. This sets up, if you're doing this, this sets up an adversarial relationship between early change adopters and those whose commitment you're hoping to earn still. Finally, people long for a piece of the past. They tell stories, unearth artifacts that remind them of old projects and processes or even colleagues. One consolidated organization found that there was a run on the old agency's logo wear. For months, employees wore the logo wear on Casual Friday in a display of pride regarding their past affiliation. So eventually, they integrated to the new organization's logo wear and with their wardrobes, and accepted during the acceptance stage. So this could have been viewed as a divisive practice by wearing the old organization's logo, but it was permitted and accepted as an important part of the employee's history. Well, getting people to let go of one thing, but leading in the neutral zone is a different type of challenge. And characteristically, transition leaders recognize that this phase is emerging when the most disconcerting situations arise. Excuse me. This is also referred to as the groan zone, and it's characterized by struggle and difficulty. So some of the symptoms of this is a loss of productivity, energy, motivation, feelings of disorientation and self-doubt, a reemergence of old resentments. Maybe employees feel overloaded and frustrated. There's a lot of miscommunication that abounds. Individuals generally flee to polar opposites. Some race toward the new beginning, and others try to dig in and save the old way. So it's difficult during this time to achieve consensus, and you might find that loyalty wanes as well. So I painted a miserable picture of the neutral zone. It's rough territory, but it really is necessary. And I'm not going to say it's not that bad, because it's tough, but you just have to trust the process, that it's part of the process. So avoid concluding that the feelings emerging during this phase indicate that something is wrong with you as the transition leader, or that something is wrong with the people who are experiencing these emotions. It's just part of that. As painful as it might seem, the transition leader has to resist the urge to escape the neutral zone and run away. The neutral zone feels perilous, but this phase is the organization's best opportunity for innovation, creativity, transformation, and revitalization. This is the stage when the old patterns begin to dissolve and the new patterns begin to emerge. So the transition leader must provide clear and hopeful direction during the neutral zone, reassuring, encouraging innovation, organizational strength, creativity. So you can't speed up or skip the neutral zone. The magic of it is found in the journey through it. And during this stage, or this phase, employees and managers need to reorient themselves to new structures, processes, and definitions. But there are, of course, are some things that transition leaders can do to help people with this process by employing a number of tools. Reframing the situation. That's the first one here. Individuals may refer to the change in negative terms, such as it's dying on the vine, the end game, or the sinking ship. These are all metaphors that might describe a person's initial motive orientation to the change, but they don't help to move the organization forward. So a transition leader can carefully choose hopeful metaphors, such as navigating a new frontier, running the rapids of a new economy, or building a bridge over the chasm. Things like that suggest a more innovative spirit. So reframing must also involve more than just words. The reframed situation has to be supported by actions and policies that encourage such a mindset. As an example, there's an organization that was facing a program cut and arranged for a transfer of an employee to some of the functions. And the situation was changed or reframed from a demise to a bridge, and the employee's performance expectations and rewards were tied to a timely and well-orchestrated transition, rather than focusing in on all of the pain. Temper the rate of change. People need time to adjust to change, and the number and rate of changes can determine the probable success of transition. So avoid introducing a steady stream of invasive changes if at all possible. And one way to do this is to package related changes together to avoid a barrage of countless adjustments. Create temporary structures. Oftentimes, temporary policies, procedures, and practices, even roles, are needed during an interim period. Clearly defining these and making them easy to access and reference helps employees cope with a more ambiguous and confusing circumstance that might exist during the change. Identify the practices as temporary too, so that expectations don't become fixed. Focus on short-range goals and objectives. If you can break assignments into shorter range goals and celebrate many small accomplishments, it's better than waiting for the long-term outcomes. Helping employees focus on checkpoints increases the sense of control that they have and achievement so desperately needed during this painful and neutral zone. Establish realistic measures. Decreased productivity is characteristic of the neutral zone. So establish some realistic targets and steadily increase them as productivity returns and innovations increase. Setting unrealistic targets is only going to frustrate people and create more resentment. Determine some emerging needs. During the neutral zone, all kinds of gaps start to reveal themselves. As knowledge, skill, and technology gaps become apparent, do everything you can to provide employees with the necessary training, equipment, and resources to meet the new expectations. You know, there's really no better time to create community than in the midst of chaos. If you think of times in our communities and workplaces when you felt tremendous pressure or threat, perhaps you recall a spirit of cooperation and ingenuity, even though the direction may not have been so clear. So adversity tends to reveal opportunities to create strong bonds, and effective transition leaders are able to harness that. So cultural anthropologists refer to the neutral zone as a state of liminality, which I learned is really originates from a Latin term meaning threshold. So I think this is great because figuratively a person stands at the threshold between their previous way and a new way. So in their extensive studies, Arnold von Genep and Victor Turner observed that establishment of customs, traditions, and rituals plays an important part in helping people transition from the uncertainty of this neutral zone to a more permanent social structure. So for this reason, the neutral zone is an opportunity zone. The transition leader has an important task to rebuild a sense of identification within the group and foster connectedness with one another. And this can be accomplished by establishing a structure, safety, and encouragement. To be effective in doing this, the transition leader should keep in mind 3 principles. 1, look for opportunities to build community outside the typical myopic scope of a small work unit. So if the entire organization is undergoing change, it's a great time for employees to share notes with one another who exist outside of their specialized work unit or their particular discipline. These relationships offer opportunities to cross-pollinate ideas and think outside the box. And these synergistic relationships strengthen the organization as a whole and help individuals begin to see the bright side of the chaos. So intergroup projects, activities, picnics, and the like supersede old boundaries, and they can spawn creativity. Open the channels of communication. Increased frequency of meetings is likely necessary when you're going through a change. Frequency is more important than duration. Even short sessions to share information, clarify expectations, or engage in just Q&A can quell a lot of anxiety and keep the dialogue alive. And then finally, in the neutral zone, people want to feel that they're in this together. Transition leaders have to be wary of showing preference or favoritism to one group or another. People will put up with a great deal of discomfort if they know that everyone has to do the same. But if one group is treated special or exempted because of position or some other advantage, it becomes a symbol for resentment. And these principles will help. These 3 principles that I've outlined here will help in establishing effective structures and creating environments where employees feel safer amidst all the uncertainty. Underlying the principles and tools we've talked about in regard to managing the neutral zone is the tremendous opportunity for innovation and creativity. So we're going to talk a little bit about innovation, which realistically is a topic all in itself. So I'm going to kind of buzz through some of these things. But underlying this, I want to say that during more stable times, organizational inertia discourages innovation in order to preserve continuity and consistency. But during the neutral zone, there's enough chaos and the restraints on innovation are at their weakest. So here's some ways that you can foster some innovation. Model the behavior of challenging your own assumptions. And if you examine your own assumptions, constructs, and processes, that will help others as well to challenge their own assumptions. And promote activities that do challenge assumptions, break from traditions. Try some new techniques and tools. Encourage experiments. And I might say about this also that if expect some ideas to fail. If every idea you try is a make or break endeavor, employees and managers, they're going to hold back on groundbreaking efforts. Embrace challenges. Nobody likes to lose. Weakness, failures, collapses, and so on. They can be really demoralizing events. But if they're reframed as discoveries toward new solutions, it becomes a little less anxiety producing. Encourage dissent. This, I'm not talking about being belligerent. Dissent doesn't have to be belligerent. It can be respectful and professional. One thing that a leader can do also is, if this is not natural for the group, or people are feeling reserved, a transition leader can specifically assign particular individuals or a group of individuals to pose challenges and confront the assumptions that the group is having. Engage in brainstorming and resist premature certainty. When you're in chaos, there is a tendency to latch on to the first the first conventional idea that presents itself. So a rush to answer or close an issue is tempting in the name of solidarity, but a pattern of doing this can choke off new ideas and ultimately stunt progress. So one of the greatest challenges for a transition leader is accurately observing the impact of various change decisions. And leaders generally assume that feedback will be received through chains of command and other established conventions, but this rarely happens as feedback gets filtered and reinterpreted and sometimes altogether blocked, even on its way upward. There's a mechanism, and I'm not going to go into this in fine detail, but called this mechanism is a transition monitoring team. It's actually assembled by the transition leader to give feedback to the leader. The important part of this is that their scope is limited. They are broadly representative in terms of the disciplines or the work groups that they might be involved in, as well as levels of the organization. And what's really important for a transition monitoring team to have is direct access to the leader and to have regularly scheduled report backs where they can share what's working and what is not. So here we are now at the beginning. After individuals wrestle with the change in the neutral zone and they emerge in a new beginning. And beginnings are different from starts. The transition leader learns this distinction. So remember, at the beginning of this session, we talked about starts that they might include mechanical things like new assignments, new reporting structures, and budgets, so on. You can flip a switch and make a start happen, but beginnings have to develop over time. They're transformative. They include new identities, new understandings, new value systems, new attitudes. And what I would say underlying this is that beginnings cannot be implemented like a start can. Beginnings have to be cultivated. So beginnings are both scary and exciting. They're scary because they solidify the new commitments with a sense of finality. They also confirm that the ending really happened, and beginnings feel risky. There's no guarantee that the change will work. It hasn't been played out over time. It's uncharted territory. So beginnings sometimes can trigger old anxieties and memories of past failures, incidents, or even traumatic organizational events. Also, for a few, the neutral zone was a comfortable place. There are some individuals who thrive in an environment of ambiguity and chaos. They have difficulty adjusting to more fixed patterns or processes. And let's face it, there are some who have enjoyed the chaos because it offered them a break from routine performance pressure. But beginnings are also exciting. So they signify continuity and reduced ambiguity. They can come as a great relief from the tumult of the neutral zone. And this can be a very affirmative and stabilizing feeling. And individuals who have wrestled in the neutral zone are often ready and eager to activate their commitment. So beginnings may serve to confirm new identities that have been uncertain for some time. And in some cases, beginnings offer a severance from past weaknesses, failings, or limiting systems. So the transition leader can cultivate beginnings by understanding and employing the 4 Ps. They are a purpose, picture, plan, and part. This borrows from psychologist Carl Jung's pioneering work, and you can see dimensions in this that are found in tools like the Myers-Briggs type indicator as well. So let's explore these 4 Ps. The first is a purpose. Communicate the reason that for the outcome that you're seeking. What was the problem? Who said so? What evidence is there that that was a problem? What would have occurred had nobody acted on it? And if you don't know the answers to these questions, ask for more explanation and gather more information. And so thinkers need to be able to make sense of the change. The next one is a picture. So purposes and ideas, they're abstract, and some folks need a visual. What does the change look like when we get there? What does the physical space look like? How do people operate and interact? How does the work get done? What will people experience? Use some show and tell. There are numerous visual aids, maps, diagrams, videos, prototypes. And keep the picture imaginable and realistic. Plan. Changes are often well scheduled with stages and rollout dates. Transitions get overlooked in planning oftentimes, though. So when you're planning, focus on the process milestones. When will leaders communicate such and such? When will this training be delivered? When and how will the new designs be posted? When will transition teams be formed? When will site visits occur? When and where will the celebration take place? Transition plans differ from change plans. They're more focused on the person's orientation to the change than the change itself. Part, the last P is part. People need a role to play. This is key to engaging in the new beginning. It provides a cornerstone that the person can focus energy on new directions. An employee needs to know what part they're going to play in the new structure and have a part in the transition itself. So most effectively, the employee could have a part in a planning group, a task force, or some other direct role, but minimally an employee could have at least an opportunity to provide input. So as people emerge from the neutral zone into the new beginning, an effective transition leader can reinforce the focus and behaviors that have replaced the old way of doing things. In his work, William Bridges suggests 4 rules for reinforcing the behavior, and we're going to talk about each of these rules that's listed there, and we'll start there. Be consistent. Rule number 1, be consistent. This requires a focus on alignment between what is being asked and what is being rewarded. Evaluate continuously, as it's easy for things to fall out of alignment, for these 2 ideas to fall out of alignment. So some of the observations and questions that you might ask yourself to check for alignment is the message in conflict with actual practice? Are austerity measures applied equally? Are reward systems designed to reinforce new behaviors, or are they reinforcing the old undesired behaviors? Do you request feedback but resist criticism? Do you ask people to risk but then punish mistakes? Are obstacles appropriately removed in order for people to address priorities, or do they remain in conflict with the day-to-day tasks? Rule number 2, ensure quick success. Remember that success is reassuring. It can take a great deal of time to realize lasting systemic changes, but establishing short-term objectives and triumphs will sustain these new beginnings. And on the other hand, if no immediate sign of success is evident, it causes even strong supporters to begin to doubt. And drawing attention to quick, measurable achievement, it'll encourage progress. Rule number 3, symbolize the new identity. So during the change, anything can and will be seen symbolically. So a transition leader must be aware of all the subtle cues that are either reinforcing or disconfirming the change message. So stemming from this awareness, an effective transition leader designs and implements symbolism to reinforce a new beginning. So examples of this might be metaphors and stories that are used to describe the workplace, office space and layout, where people are situated, dress codes, other workplace policies, visual displays, wall decor, office ornamentation. All of these can have symbolic ramifications. So placards, stickers, quotes, sayings, those kinds of things can all contribute to reinforcing symbolically the identity of the change that you're trying to move forward. The primary question is whether the presenting symbols accurately reflect the change message. Rule number 4 is to celebrate success. So we discussed a little bit about the importance of celebrating endings and respecting the past. Equally important is celebrating the beginning. There are numerous ways to do this. They can be big or small, novel or routine. They can be lighthearted or formal. Regardless, it marks a spot in time for an important achievement. And the purpose is to mark the conclusion of the change initiative and prompt the finish of the transition. I might add that naturally some individuals will still be maneuvering through their personal transitions, but the timing should coincide with the majority emerging from the difficult phase, from the more difficult phases of transition. So let's return to the simple model that we started with here. A transition starts with an ending and finishes with a beginning, and the role of the transition leader is one of coach and guide as the organization moves through the change, the phases of transition, and moves through the change initiative itself. So there are lots of tools that a leader can use to increase the odds of success. I've shared a few today, and really this, my hope for you was to provide, to introduce you to the phases and concepts of the transition process, the human side of change, and how they differ from the change initiative itself. And I'm hoping that this increases your awareness and understandings as you approach your next change initiative. And I say is continue to plan, develop, hone the skills and techniques that will make you a successful transition leader. Happy leading. Before you take off, I want to be sure to note that in 2 weeks, on October 7th at 10 a.m., Dan Chase will be presenting Lasting Leadership Lessons. This is going to cover some leadership topics, any specific circumstances that transcend specific circumstances or crises. We've been talking a lot about the crises of the COVID-19 world and things that we've been dealing with that have rocked our world a little bit lately. We're going to return to some of the tried and true lessons that have applied historically, that apply today, and still apply under normal conditions. So some of the questions that Dan will address are why most leadership development efforts fail. Why is it that the relationship between, or what is the relationship between management and leadership? What is the importance of organization and leader fit? And how do you become an authentic transformational leader? So please join us on October 7th for Lasting Leadership Lessons. With that,